Welcome to the MuseCast. I'm Shawna Boren, and we've got Osheta Moore and Dan Kent. And one of the things I love about the MuseCast is we get to dive in a little deeper into the sermons that we hear at Woodland Hills every weekend. And we have three different voices, three different perspectives, three different points of view. And so hopefully you find that helpful. Thank you for tuning in. We're glad that you're here. And I am really excited to dive into David Morrow's sermon about lamenting. He entitled it Hitting the Wall. And Dan, what is the big takeaway? Can you please summarize for us what David shared with the community on Sunday?
Yeah, there was a lot there. It was rich. I think. Well, first of all, let me just say this: it might be one of my favorite sermons of the year so far. And I've never heard a sermon based out of Lamentations, which is just like that's amazing. I've never seen that before, so that was cool just right off the bat. But I think the other thing I really liked about it is that I feel like he is really touching like what we're all experiencing right now, that nothing is the way that we expect it. It's not the way that we're used to it, and we don't know the way it's going to be on the other end of this pandemic. And so that's kind of what he talked about. Is he talked about sort of this arc of lament, and he pulls this out of Lamentations, where whenever something traumatic happens, like a virus that takes over the world, that forces us into our homes, there is this sense of loss or grief that happens where we lose something that we loved and that we cherished, which is our way of life. And that really sucks. But there is still this third phase there where you get through that grief and you get to hope for the future. And David looks through Lamentations as this vehicle to talk about how to go from the traumatic event through the grieving and into hope. And he talks about how the structure of Lamentations sort of forces us to walk all the way through our grief, where we can't take any shortcuts. We have to walk all the way through. And so that's sort of the foundation, the basis of the message. And I thought it was just absolutely beautiful. I loved it.
Yeah, it was really encouraging. It was very timely, but there were a couple of things that I had to struggle with, but in a good way. David talked about that liminal space. Do you guys remember that? That space in between. So so we experienced the trauma, like you said, and then we're in this place of grieving, of sorrow, of just honest crying out to God. And then that could go on for a while. And in that in-between space before we're able to enter into hope is called the liminal space. And before I've heard it talked about like a book. If you're reading a book, we are in that in-between place. We've read one page and we're about to go to the other page, but we haven't gotten there yet. And I know that's real. And I know that's true. And Osheta, David talked about how God meets us in that place, but man, I had to wrestle with that because honestly, I would rather not hang out in that liminal space. Am I the only one that felt that way? Sometimes it's just too real and I want to move on to hope.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is part of the way that we've been taught to think about things is very linear, like this thing happens and this thing happens and then this next thing happens. But really it's more like a map. It's kind of a little bit all over the place. And you grieve and you begin your grieving process and you feel like you're moving on to hope, but then something triggers and you kind of got to go back and enter into that grieving space again. And so I really loved how in the sermon, he was incredibly pastoral about that. This is a reality that we're all in, and we have to do our work to put a name to it, understand what we're in. We're in this liminal space, liminality, put a word to it so that we have some agency around it. But then also it's important for us to deal with it. We have to deal with the pain of this if we're ever going to get to that place of hope and healing on the other end. That other end looks like it's not going to be thing that happens, this thing happens, it's coming, but it's going to come in a different way than we're used to or we want it to come,
Right. And Dan, David said he even went so far, and I have a bone to pick with him. He even went so far as to call that liminal space a gift. And in my brain, I get that, but when I think about reality, when I think about people who this is pretty serious. If we're considering the situation that we're in right now, right? If we're looking beyond disappointments of things that we're not able to do, if we look at real situations of lost jobs, lost homes, not knowing where our next meal is coming from, to look at the liminal space as a gift is really challenging. Can you help us like unpack that a little bit, Dan?
Well, yeah, I don't think that, first of all, I would say that I think the gift language there, I think what he would mean by that is that there is an opportunity for a blessing within the suffering. And I think that's how I would word it, because the idea of it being a gift suggests that God gave this to us.
Right.
And I would want to be careful not to say that God did this to us in order
Right.
for us to learn this lesson. I think that there are blessings that we can reap from it, but I don't think it's necessarily a gift. You know, it's kind of like you know, if you fall into the water, that sucks and it's dangerous, but you might learn how to swim, and that's a good thing, and you can kind of get stronger, and you can,
Hopefully.
there's an opportunity there for you to learn a skill, you know, which might be sort of a traumatic example now that I think about it, but
Oh my God.
but I guess what I would say though is that everything that we learn has this liminal space. There's this time when we didn't know it, and then there's this time when we do know it. And when you see somebody as a kid, when you see somebody riding a bike, it's like, man, I want to be able to do that. But you get on the bike and you fall over, and it's just, I don't think I'll ever be able to do it. And you have to go a certain speed in order to ride the bike, in order for the centrifugal force to go. And that's really scary. And there's danger there, and there's always danger, and there's always fear when you're learning something new. But eventually you kind of, your muscles learn what to do, and the centrifugal force kicks in, and suddenly you're riding a bike. And then you get to the point like me where you don't ride a bike for 25 years, and you get on and you still learn, you still know it. Like there's, you don't have to go through that anymore, because it's just part of you now. And hopefully that's what this pandemic will be like, is we'll learn things from it, and they'll become part of us in a good way.
That is helpful to frame it in that way. I think for me, I just like to know, like, okay, so for how long? Like, how long do I have to be in this space before hope? Like, seriously. And Dan, I'm sorry, you can't relate to this, but I have 4 children, and each 4 times that I was going into labor, the thought was, this isn't going to be pleasant, but at the end, and I know the end is coming, I'll have this beautiful, precious life. And so I just, do you guys think there is a timetable? Like, how long do we have to, or get to, or should we spend in that place of lamenting, in that liminal space? What do you think?
Well, I think it's a question we have to be super careful in the way that we phrase it, because I don't want to phrase it with how long, because I mean, because then that requires that we have to put some sort of timetable on it, or time frame. I really feel like one of the things that I have been trying to get my brain around and allow the Spirit to help me feel centered on is that it will take us however long it takes. And it does, and the time frame is not what I need to be focusing on. It's this like present moment that I'm in, and knowing that the Lord is with me in this present moment, and that I can be empowered to be as fully present for my family, as fully like self-aware of my needs, as fully compassionate and holding intention. Like there's opportunity for me to learn here, but there's also people suffering, like the good, not the good, the silver lining, and then the dark cloud at the same time, holding those intention. And so like, I think it's going to take as long as it's going to take. It's not, one of the things that I was reading online the other day, somebody was talking about, like, you know, all this isn't going to be over once the virus is suppressed, because there are lasting effects on people's lives that is going to affect like the next generation. Like there are people whose bodies will never function the same way because they've got through the virus, and now their organs are not functioning to the same capacity as before. So I feel like it's really helpful for me to just stop asking myself, like, how long, oh Lord? And you are with me, oh Lord. Like changing that prayer, that lamenting prayer to like, I'm suffering, but you are with me, Lord, you know?
And I think it's okay to ask the question, how long, oh Lord? But I don't think we need to stay there. Like, I think we need to try to get to that place of acknowledging God is with us. You are with me, oh Lord. I think that is so key. Dan, earlier when we were discussing, you talked about some times in your life where you experienced the trauma, like the beginning of the arc, and then in your sense of Lamentations, you were able to move on to hope, but that didn't mean that you were done lamenting. And I feel like kind of what Osheta was saying, like we don't know how long these the ripple effect of all this is going to last. So can you talk a little bit more about moving towards hope, but also recognizing that doesn't mean that we are completely cut off from the lamenting process?
That's right. Yeah. And you know, a lot of us have had loss and we feel that. And, you know, I lost, my good friend Jessica in 1996, and I suffered really harshly for like 4 years. It was really, really hard. But even now, it's 25 years later, I'll be watching a cartoon or a commercial, and all of a sudden it'll trigger something. I'll just start crying. And so I don't think that it ever, you know, and Dave, you know, when you're talking about phases, it's always going to sound like, okay, when you're done with phase 2, it's time to move on to phase 3. And yeah, but that's not how it is, of course. And Dave wouldn't, I don't think that,
but absolutely
I think that, yeah, I think that we're always kind of working on that grief. Here's what I would say though, and Osheta really put words to something that I think really helped me. And I experienced that, but I didn't really have words for it. And that is the difference between, you know, God is doing this to me, so I ask him, how long are you going to do this to me? To no, God's not doing this to me, but I can trust that God is with me, and God is suffering with me. And because part of the reason why the grieving doesn't ever go away is because the injustice is still unjust, no matter how much time passes. It's not fair that Jessica died of cancer when she was 22 years old. She should have lived longer. She should have been able to get married. She should have been able to, you know, pursue some of her dreams. I mean, she spent most of her life in school. She never got to experience life without school, you know, and that's not fair. And so, you know, and all of the suffering that she did, and her positive attitude, and yet it still all failed and she died, and it's not fair. And so that will always be there. But what I think it does though, is it doesn't go away, but it opens up space in us when we experience somebody dying of cancer. Spaces open up in our heart for other people who are suffering from cancer. And when I see kids who have cancer, I mean, I have this depth of empathy that I didn't have before. And that produces this ability to have empathy and compassion and connection and joy that I just didn't have that capacity before Jessica died. And so even though the suffering doesn't ever go away, I think it opens our hearts up to new things.
Yeah. That is so beautiful, Dan. And I think one of the things I love, one of the things that has been the most freeing for me being a part of the Woodland Hills community, is just the knowledge and the realization that we live in this fallen world and crappy things happen. God did not wish those upon us. He didn't send them to us to teach us a lesson. When we grieve, when we hurt, when we're traumatized, he's right there grieving and hurting with us, not causing it. And I just think that's important to remember. Osheta, like you and I were talking about, there are things in life, like Dan was just saying, that just aren't fair. And we can't, it's not just a get over it, got my golden ticket, time to move on. Like we can not be bitter, but we move into a different place of hope in Jesus, but also realizing the reality is still the reality.
Right. And I think too, like what Dan is saying, is that one of the things that going through grief, and one of the gifts, if you will, let's just use gifts as a language. We've already explained what we mean by that. But one of the gifts, if you will, of it is that when you come out, you have a little bit of a picture of how things should not be. And then you want to be a part of partnering with God to make things the way they should be. So like, I will never, ever be okay with racism in our country. I will never, ever be okay with the division in our church over that. And if I had not experienced grief and lamenting over that, I wouldn't have the passion that I have to be a part of reconciliation work. But it's like what Dan was saying, you kind of have to go through it. And so there's a part of me that is so like, I'm so cautious to be praying for people who are suffering, but at the same time, I'm praying for those people for whom the Spirit is saying, like, this is your moment. Like, I'm teaching you something, like I'm calling you to do something, to like step up and rise up. And I think that's one of the gifts that comes from being peacemakers, being reconcilers in a broken world, is we get to partner with God in making it right.
Absolutely. And Dan, don't you also think, like, as you guys are talking about this and saying these things, I'm like, yes and amen to all of it. And there is another side though, like those who don't have the power, maybe they're not mature enough or old enough to see, okay, this isn't brought to me by God, but God is with me in it. Like they're just suffering.
Mm-hmm.
Can you, Dan, and then also you, Osheta, speak to that person who, for whatever reason, maybe they're a child and this is really tough for them in ways that we can't imagine. Or the trauma that someone is experiencing is really rough. And so they're really unable to envision this liminal space and it being a blessing that God is with them. What encouraging things can you guys say to that person?
Yeah, I think, right now what I've thought most about during this pandemic is everybody talks about isolating at home.
Yes.
And when I was sick in March, just being able to be sick on my couch, I just sat up once and I thought, oh my gosh, if I was homeless, I wouldn't have this couch. And I wouldn't be able to just rest here. And just imagining people who are homeless and then also sick, man, I can't imagine how horrible that would be. I mean, I was sick in March and I don't know what I have. I haven't been tested yet. But I was talking with Barbara, like, hey, if this is it for me, you need to have passwords for my computer and all that kind of stuff, And that's how bad I felt. And
Right.
having to experience that being homeless, I don't know how I could. And some of the homeless people, they die homeless and they experience the trauma, they experience the grief, they experience the suffering, and they never really cashed in on the hope. They never really got what they hoped for. And that's part of the injustice of the world. And at some point we all will have hope that doesn't get cashed in here on earth. There all the things that we hope for and what we're made for, the earth just it's like going to like a thrift store. You're probably not going to find the thing you're looking for there. Sometimes you might find something neat, but it's probably not going to be the exact thing you're looking for. But the hope that we have ultimately is we have this meta hope, which is that we were made for something bigger and that God is going to meet that hope and cash in and fulfill that hope beyond our wildest dreams. And unfortunately, that's been sort of twisted into this Christianity is all about the future and it's not about the present here on earth. But I think that that's a mistake, because I think that there are some things that we have guarantees on about the future. And it's just that some people, they make their entire faith about that. But
Right.
at some point, I think that we're all stuck with injustices that just never get satisfied here.
Right.
And we have to rely on God and Jesus, I think.
Yes. So I love it that you called it meta hope.
Yeah.
Cool. Osheta, let's talk about that hope a little bit. What is that hope? Because if we're not careful, David talked about some temptations that we could have. Like if we're not careful to really, for lack of a better phrase, do our time in the lamenting and the liminal space, if we're quick to try to rush through that, we can rush towards things that we think will be our hope. And so we can shut down, we can withdraw, we can numb ourselves with a variety of exterior things. But what is our true hope? I mean, yes, we know the answer, but talk to us a little bit about, like, what are we talking about when we say we need to get to push through to hope?
Yeah. So I think one of the things that defines or gives texture to my hope is the reality that like we already said, that we're like not alone in our suffering. And so like if I were to talk to my 13-year-old who was bawling 3 nights ago about the fact that she's just incredibly lonely and she is an extrovert who is not doing okay right now. She's not doing okay. And she has exhausted all of the ways that she can to connect with people, and she's just missing that. And one of the things that I kept saying is that you're not alone in this. Like, I'm here with you. What you're going through is the worst. I feel like I'm experiencing it as the worst. Like, you're not alone in this. And the meta hope, or the not meta hope, the like real in our life hope right now that the Holy Spirit brings to us is that we are not alone in this. Like, this is why Jesus was like, hey, I'm leaving you with the Spirit so that you can continue doing my work, but not just for that, so you can continue knowing I'm with you. Like, I'm not with you in the body, but I am with you in spirit. And so like that hope is that the Lord is with us. And so what I would say is, if you don't feel like God is close to you, then there are some like practices, there are some things that you can do to kind of tap in, because the Lord is with us in this. The Lord is grieving with us. The Lord is frustrated. The Lord, the Lord wants to be our companion, to be our comforter. Like the hope is that we can get through this, knowing that we are not alone in this, and that, and so that for me, that's the texture, that's the realness of my hope, is that I'm not doing this alone.
I love you tapped into something.
I'm sorry.
No, it's
I was just going to say, well, she was talking about, you know, trusting that God is with us. And don't you experience this, you know, being married? One of the things that I was really surprised about is that there is this comfort in just having a witness. And just like when I have a bad day, it helps that somebody says, wow, that's a crappy day. You know, just like there's a witness to the injustice of my day. And it's usually something silly, like, you know, they were out of, you know, caramel buns at the bakery or something like that. But even something simple like that, it's good to have a witness. And then when you have more serious things, having a witness is, and that we have a divine witness for all of the deepest, most private injustices that we have. I think that's profound. Yeah.
That's one of the reasons why I'm kind of glad this is happening in the age of social media, because I think social media gives us, when I see somebody post like, I'm heartbroken about this, or I'm frustrated about this, or here's my avocado toast, they're simply asking like, can you witness my life? Like, can you be with me? And so I'm kind of glad that this is happening in a time where we have avenues for people to feel, to have their lives witnessed, for us to say like, I see that. And in this case, I see the pain, I see the suffering. I also think it's important to remind people that while they may feel isolated and alone, like we have ways here at Woodland to tap into community, to invite others to witness your life alongside you, who will help hold your pain for you. Because I think that's an important thing, is that we don't become so, that the isolation doesn't cause us to become so focused on our internal work, or only like self-aware, but self-aware and then others community aware too, so we can all lament together.
Right. And that's what, like, I feel like we're all stepping on each other, because we all have the same amazing thought, which is great. And this is okay. Like, we're having a conversation, it's fine. But Osheta was talking about how she's able to come alongside her daughter. And then Dan, what you were saying about having a witness, and then same with you, Osheta, like the things we have at Woodland Hills, the key is we need to bring our lamenting to our people, like to our community. We need people in our life that can help us process, pray, lament with us, and then help us if we're stuck, pull us in to the next phase of hope.
Didn't David say something, and I might get it flipped, but it's like, it was written like I, and then we, or was it that way? Yes.
Yeah, there was a point in Lamentations where it switched to communal language. We.
And I think that's a good framework for us to think about how we work through this arc. Is it's important for us to do that individual work, but at some point the hope is at the other end that we know God's with us, and then we enter into community with each other, to be reminded that we're not alone in this as well, you know? Yeah.
Absolutely. Dan, how has that helped you as you travel through the arc, let's say, in moments in your life? How has it helped you to have a community, to have others, to know that you're not suffering or dealing alone?
Yeah, it's I think that's probably sort of an apex of healing, where because when it first happens, you have this feeling like nobody has suffered like I have, you know, like this is like, I have this profoundly unique suffering that no one understands the burdens of suffering that I've experienced. But then at some point you sort of come to reality that no, everybody is suffering like this. And many people have suffered, you know, very similar things. And then you can get comfort from that, you know, because there is a certain amount of comfort when you feel like you're the only one who has suffered like this, because it's like you have this special standing with God, but that's not reality, and that you can't, it's not going to last long. And then you find comfort in the reality that other people have suffered too. And there's part of like, for some reason, and maybe one of you two can speak into this, I don't have a good answer for it, but there's something about crying with somebody else that, I mean, even God, this was just last fall. This was just last fall. I met my friend Adam, who's a pastor here in Maplewood, and he and I were at Jessica's bedside together in the 90s. And there's only like a handful of us who spent time with her in the hospital. And like the minute I said her name, we both started crying. And there's just something about grieving together that it's like a healing multiplier. And I don't know how that works.
Yeah, and I know Osheta, we're gonna rock, paper, scissors it. I'm just gonna say really quick. What I have found is when I take it from the darkness of just myself, where the enemy can have a field day, when I bring that to light and share that with others, even me sharing, it brings healing to me, but it also can bring healing to them. Because then it gives them permission to also open up and share. And sometimes it's even a similar thing. And that's why I just feel like it's so important to allow the Holy Spirit, the gift that Jesus gave us, like Osheta was saying, to be with us and prompt us and not keep us in that darkness where the enemy can have a heyday, but instead bring those things to light and allow his Spirit to bring about healing. Your turn, Osheta.
I'll be quick. No, I think one of the reasons why crying with each other is because it's impossible to be perfect and to be real about your emotions at the same time. Meaning, like, you're going to look messy. You're going to make noises that are like not super cute. You're going, like, it is your most real and raw and vulnerable space. And I think being able to be that way with somebody and have them fully be present in that and then be their own raw, vulnerable self too, I think that is a picture of how God receives us. And I think part of our calling is to be reflections and spaces for people to see how God receives them. And so when we are the kind of people that can sit with grief and sit in that pain and say, I don't care that you ugly cry, like, that's beautiful. Right. I'm grateful for that. And I'm going to ugly cry with you. Like, beauty happens out of that because that's the love of God on display.
Amen. So. Amen.
Ugly cry. I love that.
Let's all ugly cry together.
Right here in the MuseCast. Grab your tissues.
Well, something that, in all seriousness, so one of the things that the three of us talked about was asking the Lord, taking some time to process all that we have heard from David and then from the three of us, and encouraging everyone just to bring that before the Lord and to imagine Jesus asking each of us, where does it hurt? Like, where is your pain? Because he absolutely cares about that, right? He wants to know where the heartache is, where the suffering is. And so do you guys think that would be helpful, a helpful exercise? I know, Osheta, you talk a lot about different types of prayer, contemplative prayer. And Dan, you are very real, and you've talked about how we just need to lay those things before the Lord and trust that he's right there with us. But do you guys think that would be a helpful exercise for us and everyone, like in the next days and weeks, just to really sit with the Lord and just be honest about where it hurts, where the pain is, how we're suffering, and give him an opportunity to show up in those places?
I think it's really, really important because words have power. And when we can put words to what's going on in here, we have a sense of agency. We know what to ask for to others. Like, I am feeling lonely. And now what does lonely mean? What does lonely look like for me? Now I know what to ask. I am feeling anxious, or I am in need of whatever, but I think being able to put words to what's going on inside is a powerful tool for us. And then it also, for me, I realized that I was using the word tired as like a umbrella word for all the things I was feeling. And even writing that down and saying like, no, and then I had to parse out what tired meant for me, really gave me a sense of, okay, now I need to know how to ask for what I need and what do I need to feel whole going through this grieving process.
That is a good word, a really good word. Dan,
and I think in the same spirit, like putting words to it, the more concrete that we can be, the more that God can heal, the more specific we can be about. And that's why I think the activity that David led us through, where we just said the things that we miss and had the drawings and all the words, that was really helpful, because some of those things I do miss that. And you didn't realize you missed it until it's named. And what happens when we don't name those things and we don't take time to grieve those specific things is they sort of accumulate in this emotional junk drawer that can pop out years later in ways that we don't want it to. And that's why I think the more you can get specific and grieve those things, the better you'll be in the long run.
Amen.
So, and the more people can help, like Osheta said.
So let's all clean out our junk drawer, man. Our junk drawer.
That's right. Let's have an ugly cry and clean out our junk drawer. That's right.
Yeah, everybody's junk drawer is already cleaned because they did all the organizing. Now let's do the emotional stuff.
It's the emotional.
Yeah, that's right.
We're gonna get to it. Well, you guys, it has been again just a rich time together of diving into the different nooks and crannies of the sermon. I think it's been really healing and really freeing. So thank you for joining us. Thank you, Dan and Osheta. We really do have fun with these. So thank you for being a part of it. We invite you to come back next week. And right now, we just want to leave you with a blessing, with a benediction. And so please listen to Osheta right now.
So receive these words read from David, from the poet Jan Richardson. So go in peace and receive this as a benediction. You will dream dreams and you will see the world ablaze with blessing. So wait for it. Still yourself. Stay. Amen.
Amen. Amen, you guys. Be blessed.